Hi, everyone. I'm Jodi Rudoren. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Forward. Welcome to our live interview with Cory Booker, senator from New Jersey, former presidential candidate, and great known friend to the Jewish community for many years. Senator Booker staff just gave us word that he is 3 or 4 minutes late, but we decided we'd open the webinar so everyone can roll in, get comfortable. I hope you all have a cocktail or a snack given the evening time. It's cool to have the senator in all of our living rooms. And I just wanted to get a few programming notes out of the way. We only have a half an hour with Senator Booker, so we're not going to be formally taking a Q&A from the audience. We probably won't have time. If you are burning up with a question, of course you can put it in there. I will look at it and maybe it will help me shape my own questions. I do encourage you to use the chat if you want to make a point or a comment to all panelists and attendees, really to the whole audience. There are various, if people want to, great, Elaine Hortz, I missed your last name, but from, I think, Alabama, is that what you said? From Jacksonville, Florida, welcome. It's a great idea to post in the chat who you are. If you have some backstory about Senator Booker, maybe some embarrassing time from his time at Stanford or something, feel free to share that in the chat. I'm sort of joking, but I think among our hundreds of registries and guests here today, we may have Julie Horowitz, who actually is the person who introduced Senator Booker and I back something like 30 years ago when we were very, very young. I've known him as he went to Yale Law School with several people I went to Yale undergrad with, and my first interview with him was 20 years ago. Ended up as a front page story in the New York Times, which I'll share in the chat in a few minutes. If you haven't been to our events before, welcome again. And just let you know that we will be sending out an email with the video of this talk and also with any links that we share in the chat and a recap of the conversation. And of course, we encourage you to share those things, the video especially, with your friends. You'll also be getting an offer for a discount subscription to The Forward, a special offer for having attended our event. You'll get that in your email, I think, with either tomorrow or the next day. I do encourage you also to sign up for our email newsletters. You can do that by going to forward.com/newsletters. That's a way to make sure you always get all the information from The Forward that you could ever need. Thank you. What? Welcome, Senator Booker. I was filibustering while we waited for you. What made you late? What were you doing that was so important?
My staff overbooks me, for crying out loud. And you know, if you really have to know, a guy's got to take a bathroom break occasionally.
Everybody needs bathroom breaks. Well, we have only 26 minutes with you until your next Zoom interview. And I know neither of us are particularly known for our tight comments and answers. So I want to kind of jump right in. I already told them that I've known you for many, many, many years, and that I believe I wrote the first front page story that featured you in the New York Times 20 years ago.
You know me since I had hair.
I've never known you with hair. And it seems like even in COVID, you are unable to grow any. Is that the deal? You're not doing the COVID
I've got the scruff on for you today. Look at this.
You know, Zoom is correcting your scruff. I'm going to get criticized for being too soft on you unless I jump right in and ask you some.
Oh my God. Come on. Let me exhale, but go ahead. Hit me with your best shot.
How are you, first of all? How's your day?
I'm doing well. Baruch Hashem, I'm doing well.
You're up in Newark, I hear. I'm in Montclair, so we've got the Jersey thing going on. And we have a lot of...
Wow.
We got a lot of Jersey people in the house today. I know lots of friends and community members from around here have shown up. You're actually my senator now, you know. I'm actually a constituent, so be careful.
I'm not going to ask you who you voted for in the primary this last week.
Well, I heard a rumor that you won 90% of the primary vote.
I had a good day, but I'm a little upset you're in Montclair. Great restaurants there. We could have socially distanced, had to Zoom over some good there's some good Ethiopian food in Montclair.
We should be doing this in my backyard.
Yes.
Oh, that would have been excellent. Okay, but let's start by talking about what has been one of your main priorities in the last few weeks, few months really, since the protests broke out after George Floyd's murder. And you have a bill on police reform that passed the House of Representatives essentially, but has been rejected, replaced in the Senate. I wanted to ask you, I wanted to say, what is the single thing that really, of all the things that you would like to change about the police, and within this debate over defund the police, abolish the police, reform the police, what is the one thing, Senator Booker, that you think would make the biggest difference? Of all the things in your bill, of all the things on the table in this debate, what single thing could we do to reduce police brutality and reduce racism in the police?
Wow, so you really are pulling out the questions here. I used to put you in the friend category. Look,
this is your issue. You want to talk about this.
I do want to talk about it, but you're slamming me with like the one thing, the biggest thing.
All right.
And I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's legislative. I mean, it's a consciousness thing for our country. I mean, it is. You know, I'm reading Eddie Glaude's book, or I just finished Eddie Glaude's book, and literally it's open right now. I was reading this just small little quote from Baldwin. Baldwin wrote the uses of the blues, and this is just a small little thing. He goes, I'm talking about what happens if you, having barely escaped suicide or death or madness or yourself, you watch your children growing up, and no matter what you do, you are powerless. You are really powerless against the force of the world that is out to tell your child that he has no right to be alive. And no amount of liberal jargon, no amount of talk about how well and how far we have progressed does anything to soften or to point out any solution to this dilemma. In every generation, ever since Negroes have been here, every Negro mother and father has had to face that child and try to create in that child some way of surviving this particular world, some way to make the child who will be despised not despise himself. I don't know what the Negro problem means to white people, but this is what it means to Negroes. And so for me, having literally had my parents when I was 13 years old and I was over 6 feet tall, begin to try to teach me how to survive in a world that seemed shocking to me, that my parents were going to such extremes of worry and fear that this world was going to react to a large black man or boy in a man's body. And then having it crush upon me in those teenage years, especially when I got behind the wheel of a car, that their admonitions, that their fear, that their worry, that their knowledge in my own family of black people disappearing. I don't know if any family doesn't have black family. I mean, my grandmother's sibling who never knew how to swim, would never swim, just found drowned in a lake. This idea that you are constantly under assault, and this tradition in America that goes back to the 1600s of black parents teaching that to black children. And so for me now to be of parental age and have young people in my life who I find myself with the same fear and admonition to see children all around me. When I lived up the street in the high-rise projects, the crew of kids that hung out in my lobby, from Hassan Washington, who was the first to die, to Shahad Smith, who was the last to die in 2018. So you asked me the legislative thing. I just want America to know itself, to know the wretchedness and the constant assaults on black bodies. It isn't just violence or police. It's also lead poisoning. It's also environmental toxins. It's also a medical system that they don't have equal access to. And even when they complain about pain, which black women's pain is diminished, therefore they die at 4 times the rate of white women. So I just want to stop this cycle. I want to end this. And it is legislation, but most importantly, it's got to first come from consciousness.
I mean, I think it leads me to a really interesting question of what it means to be a leader and a legislator, and how you balance between that kind of personal, inspirational teaching, essentially, which is obviously part of your leadership, and how do I translate that into a bill that I can get passed and politics. And I mean, the balance between those things is obviously really challenging. And I guess particularly now when we have this movement on the streets, where more people and more, I mean, certainly it's taken over the conversation in the Jewish world, is, how do we undo or address or repair decades of systemic racism? So it's kind of an interesting moment to be to doing both kinds of leadership.
But dear God, Jews and blacks have been forced to figure this out. They're at least eons. I mean, in this country, African Americans have been forced to be artists of activism, to invent new tactics and new ways of challenging violence and power. And blacks and Jews in this country have been artists of activism together, from Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner all the way to freedom riders. And so this idea that against oppression, you know, King, who famously said, I can't legislate you to love me, but I can legislate you to stop lynching me. I can't pass laws to change to change someone's heart, but I can pass a law to restrain the heartless. And so that's the balance always, right? It's about how do you become that artist of activism that makes possible the legislation. Well, the civil rights activist generation that I'm the scion of, and we all are scions of, is the beneficiaries of people who did find new modes and new ways of challenging comfort, of disturbing the comfortable, so to speak, and getting people who have become so adjusted to injustice to become maladjusted again. And that's the challenge now. And frankly, there are people doing it. The legislation that we wrote in the Justice and Policing Act couldn't have gotten maybe a fraction of the legislators would have signed on to a bill like this 4 or 5 months ago. But these activists have moved the conversation, triggered by a lot of those same age-old triggers that often moved people, whether it's 4 girls dying in a bombing in Birmingham, or whether it's women dying in the shirtwaist factory fire. There's always often been trauma that has triggered a consciousness that has then been sustained by activism that ultimately resulted in legislative change. And that's where I'm hoping we are now. You
mentioned, you know, the idea that you couldn't have gotten as many people to sign on to this legislation, even, you know, 15 minutes ago in political time. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, I feel like we have witnessed this, what seems like very rapid change, whether it's, you know, Walmart finally unlocking hair products. Today, the Redskins name gets changed. We've been talking about that for years and years and years, decades, right? People have been complaining about that. Nobody standing up to protect the cops in Minneapolis, unlike all those other killings before. So many places moving, cities and other places moving to change funding of police departments so quickly. I wanted to ask you what has surprised you the most as someone who has been in this fight in various ways for decades, in terms of what has changed in the last less than 2 months since this movement really picked up?
I mean, I don't think surprise is not an emotion I feel. and I just turn on the TV now and I'm not surprised by what I said. I'm relieved. I am overcome often. I think this is one of those periods in my life where I'm rubbed emotionally raw, and I find myself on the Senate floor weeping over the hurt and the hope. So nothing surprising me. It's more, and I think this is a common feeling of many people, which is, will this sustain? I mean, that's more the thing that keeps me up at night, that has me worried. It's like I'm so traumatized. It's like the person that comes out of a horrible violent incident but still has nightmares for weeks and months to come. I'm still you know, experience too much trauma to suddenly feel like, oh, we're there, this is a movement and we're going to make it. No, this is something that I'm praying sustains itself for the soul of our country. And so look, I get delighted when I see some teenage white girl speaking passionately about racial issues in a way that my ancestors, and maybe even Baldwin, would be proud of, listening to that. So this gives me delight, and it gives me sustenance. But I can't get comfortable. I can't believe that this is that somehow we've got momentum that will sustain. And that is a challenge to you and me and to everyone who cares about these issues, to how can we add to the momentum? How can we help sustain the momentum? How can we seize upon the opportunities as they present themselves?
So I want to ask you later, and you can just park this in the back of your head, a little bit of specific of what you think Jews in particular, Jewish organizations in particular, can do for this movement. But I want to, before we get to that, ask you something a little tougher than that. We didn't actually ask people to sign up to send us questions in advance because we knew our time was short, but about a dozen of them did. We're Jews. We don't wait to be asked. And they almost all were basically the same thing, which is about what has happened in the last few days, and some went back further, with several prominent Black athletes or celebrities, Nick Cannon, Deshaun Jackson, Steve Jackson, making really offensive anti-Semitic statements, quoting Louis Farrakhan, quoting Hitler, quoting fake Hitler, whatever, and not seeing the kind of backlash, at least immediately, or punishment that we have seen for racist statements by some of the same kinds of figures. And so I wanted to ask you, I know you made a very clear statement last year when you were running for president that you would not meet with Louis Farrakhan, that you had met with some of his followers, but that you would not sit down with him. And I guess what I'm wondering now is, what would you say if you were to meet with Nick Cannon, Deshaun Jackson, Steven Jackson? What would you tell them about Louis Farrakhan and about the danger of surfacing these kinds of statements, and about whether there is any, the inconsistency between fighting racism and surfacing anti-Semitism?
Well, first of all, I'm embarrassed to tell you I haven't heard you're riffing off of some people's names who've said these things, and I haven't heard them, but I will tell you this. I remember being so angry when the awful attack in Pittsburgh happened on a synagogue, that why did it take this country for the violence to happen? Because anti-Semitic attacks, according to the ADL, were up like 50%. Anti-Semitism was skyrocketing in this country. It's still remarkably high, these incidents. And yet we weren't naming it. We weren't calling it out. We weren't talking about it. And that's problematic to me. And so, look, I'm somebody that believes that we have to call this stuff out. We have to call out bigotry of any type, anti-Semitism. I was on a fundraising call for a Senate candidate, and somebody said something horribly about their opponent, that said something horribly homophobic, and nobody said anything, and I jumped in to just call it out. And it was uncomfortable for me to call it out, uncomfortable for that person, but that's what we have to do. And we know from great Jewish leaders of the past and great Black leaders of the past that silence in the face of injustice or bigotry or hate is complicity in it. And I think we need to check ourselves. And basically, I think that it's not up to Jewish people to defend to call out anti-Semitism. It should be Black folks that are doing that, Christian folks that are doing that, Muslim folks that are doing that. In the same way that I don't want to have to be defending, calling out racism all the time. It's sometimes, I was on the floor of the Senate, infuriated about an anti-lynching bill that Rand Paul was blocking, Kamala Harris and I, and one of my Senate colleagues came to the floor, rushed to the Senate floor, and then apologized afterwards. Why are you two the only ones that have to be down here? The two Black people in our caucus doing this. We all should be down here doing this, and that's what it means. Not to be an ally. Allies are too soft a word, because as Baldwin wrote when Angela Davis was arrested, if they come for you in the morning, they're going to come for me at night. And I think that this is something that is, anti-Semitism is in and of itself something unique and something different. I don't like it when it's just folded into all types of hate, but it is from the fruit of a same poisonous tree, and something that we have to do. Silence is unacceptable.
So here we are in July of 2020, and you could have been preparing for, in another world, you were preparing to be nominated for president, right?
That's just mean. That's mean.
Well, at least there's no convention, right? But I want to ask you about what you learned from the campaign. Why do you think you didn't get more traction, particularly with Black voters? What went wrong? What would you do different next time? What will you do different next time?
first of all, the traction with black voters issue is if Barack Obama had stopped his campaign at the same time, people would have been asking him the same question. I mean, I had no worry that if we could have made it to the South, if I could have made it to one vote, Kamala and me, we didn't even get to be voted on. I laughed in Alabama that I think I finished 5th in Alabama, and I wasn't even I had dropped out of the race a month.
Congratulations!
Thank you very much.
Huge in Alabama.
I'm big in Alabama, for crying out loud. But that's where there's such a sizable African American vote in the Democratic primary. So look, I made a decision to run a race that I knew might not be what the appetite was for. And as one reporter from CNN who wrote a post-mortem to my campaign, who said it was almost like something you had to go to experience, because she called my town halls like Oprah shows where people would cry and weep and hug, because I had to take people on a journey. Mine was not a campaign. I remember going to a stage in Iowa and being stopped by a guy who was like, dude, I want you to punch Donald Trump in the face. And I look at him, I go, dude, that's a felony. And I sit down and let me tell you why, that I'm going to tell you why love is the most powerful force in what we need right now, because we didn't beat Bull Connor, talk about a demagogue, egomaniacal. We didn't beat Bull Connor by bringing bigger dogs and bigger fire hoses. We beat him by bringing this country to a higher place. And in this dark time of demeaning and degrading, we ran a campaign that wanted to talk about human dignity and decency, that wanted to talk about that we belong to each other, that wanted to talk about that, that these ideals that we're seeing laid plain are dark ideals, and that we need to get back to the light. And so it was an odyssey for that, and I loved it. I and had a great experience every day. As you said, it wasn't just talking about policy. I'm a nerd policy wonk, but it was talking about the spirit of this country and what we needed it to be about. And what is interesting to me is drop out of a race January, February, go into an impeachment, it seems like years ago, and then a pandemic, and then now suddenly I feel a yearning for that message like I never did before. I suddenly hear people talking about healing this country, talking about decency and expanding circles of empathy and lifting the moral imagination of a country. And it's so thoroughly satisfying to me. So I don't know, when you have, I think there was 782 people that ran for president. I don't know what dynamics happen when you have such a mosh pit and it's just so hard to get oxygen even. But the experience that me and my campaign team had when we connected directly with voters, the energy that we seem to ignite, the goodness that we seem to exercise, that is there always, left me feeling better about my country, even than when I started this odyssey to see if a campaign built on messages of love, not a saccharine sentimentality, but real, hard, difficult, sacrificing, courageous love that has ultimately always been, as I mark this nation's progress, what has helped us to go further, as opposed to descending like we could even within our party sometimes. The language we use about those who vote different than us, about those who think different than us. I mean, I hate to tell you, the 58 million people that voted for Donald Trump are not our enemy. And if we cast it that way, we'll never get out of this trap that's necessary to change this political culture, where actually 75% of the stuff, from common sense gun safety, which 86% of gun owners believe in universal background checks, to protecting a woman's right to control her own body, which the overwhelming majority of Americans agree on. I can go through the stuff that we agree on, but we're failing to manifest, and people are exploiting our differences with demagoguery and fear-mongering to take our country apart, as opposed to bring us together to help us to achieve much, much more significant things in our generation.
So the polls right now are looking pretty strong for the Democrats, pretty strong for Joe Biden.
As they said in this time in 2016 about Hillary.
Say that, but I don't remember Hillary Clinton being up in Texas, which is what I read earlier tonight. But yeah, what are you worried about? It's a long way to November. What are you worried about? Are you worried about turnout? Are you worried about black voters? Are you worried about young voters? What are you worried about that will stop Joe Biden?
I don't know if this is like if blacks and Jews have a corner on this, but like we worry.
Totally.
We worry. And I mean, I'm worried about everything. I really am. I'm worried about the soul of my nation.
What are you worried about, tachlis, in terms of politics? What are you worried about will prevent Joe Biden from becoming president?
I worry about voting in a pandemic. I worry about voter turnout models. How can you figure out what they're going to be if we have all different kind of variables about voting that we just don't know. So that's something I worry about. I worry about voter suppression, and I worry about a sustained level of interest. I worry about people thinking that this election is done. If we're polling like this, well, maybe the urgency to show up is not as much there. I worry about winning the presidency and not winning back the Senate, because we're in trouble if Mitch McConnell is still in control.
Has police reform. All right, we are running out of time. I want your staff to note that people in the chat are saying we need another session. You need.
Yes, you're my friend. Hey, we could go around my staff. We could just like.
I tried that, man. It didn't work. But anyway, come to the backyard. I've got like a fire pit. We can do a cocktail. But I'm going to ask you 3 super short questions. The last one we'll be able to keep short.
The questions are short, but the answers are
one-word answers. Okay, so what job do you want in the Biden administration? Who would you pick for vice president? And then the last one, and this is where I'll get to keep you late, is I'm wondering, you've already shared some of the secular texts that you have been consulting lately, but I always love it when you bring us some text, secular or not. I wonder what you've been looking to over these months of just intensity and things we never thought would happen. So just to review, what job would you like in the Biden administration? I'll be sure to send him a message. Who would you pick for seat?
Leave me where I am in the Senate. I'm going to do, God willing, if I get reelected in New Jersey, not that I'm pandering for your vote or anything, but leave me where I am in the Senate. Don't make me pick a vice president. That's just mean. I serve with.
Well, does it need to be? I mean, we've talked. He's committed to a woman. A lot of people think it needs to be a woman of color. A lot of people think it needs to be a black woman. What do you say?
I say that I serve with Tammy Baldwin's, Tammy Duckworth's, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, all these women that I know, and I'll pick some I don't. The governor of Rhode Island is a classmate of mine. Gina Raimondo. I mean, there's just amazing women out there. I'm not going to choose between them. Let's get to your last question.
Okay. What text is inspiring you these days?
I was saying this a lot during the campaign, and because of my presidential campaign, because of I being this sort of black guy that studied Torah, I was blown away when I first went to where Martin Luther King was shot, and that there was words from the Torah right there written at the Lorraine Motel, and to sort of honor him at the place. And it's not as much to honor him, I think it's to challenge us. And I think about this now with the slaying of George Floyd as well. And remember that King, well, let's just go to the text. Joseph's brothers were gathered together and decided to kill Joseph. And they uttered these words before they threw him into a well. But he didn't die in a well. We know that he rose up to lead a nation, Egypt, out of crisis. And the words that they uttered, if you think about them right now, in this context, and today, in this moment, as well as how powerful it is to have these words written where Martin Luther King was killed, it says in the Torah, "Behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him and see what becomes of his dream." And I just think about that all the time in the wake of tragic death, of people that believed in this country, who dreamed of better days, who were willing, as King was, to die for that it's up to us, the survivors, to decide whether we will die and perish in a pit as a nation, or whether we'll rise together and lead this nation like Joseph did through crisis. And so I hope we will rise. I pray that we will elevate, that we will overcome. And I think that question, what will become of the dream, is one that our generation has to answer.
Thank you, Senator Booker. It's been great to have you. Thank you to our audience. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to ask your questions, but we appreciate you joining us. We'll try to get Senator Booker back.
Bezrat Hashem, Bezrat Hashem.
Bezrat Hashem, to test all of his pronunciations. We love to get him saying the chuz and all that. And
Are you going to give me a Yasher Koach?
Oh, Yasher Koach.
Thank you very much.
And Mitsuyan. Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent job. What can I teach you a little bit of Hebrew? Do you know anything you don't know?
I don't know what the Parsha is this week.
Oh yeah, I don't know what someone put the Parsha in the chat. Kol hakavod. That's what we say after something like this. Somebody, is that Matot Maseh we've got? I don't know what that is exactly. Matot Maseh. I'll get you a Dvar Torah in your email sometime.
Yes.
All the rabbis are putting in Matot Maseh. They'll be flooding our email boxes and our Twitter feeds. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you also to Lisa Lepson, Dina Cooperman, Gabby Brooks, and Marissa of Senator Booker's staff for making this happen. We are thrilled to have you as part of the Forward family, Cory, and all of our attendees. Oh, it's a double portion. There's Matot and Maseh.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get terribly lambasted.
I want you, Jodi. I really do miss you. I'll give you my cell number. I won't say it over here. But I'll ask Marissa to give it to you. So just send me a text. And the only thing I want from you, I don't want a hello. I want a Dvar Torah in my text.
Okay. Absolutely. I'll give you just a little mini one.
Little mini Dvar Torah.
All right. Shabbat Shalom. It's never too early to say Shabbat Shalom.
Good
have a good week.
Yes.
May you go from strength to strength.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. You as well.